You hit on something really a key element there, and that's social media. Social media is huge, and everyone knows that social media is huge today, regardless of whatever platform that you're utilizing. So, and a lot of our people, you'll find them on Facebook. And I often tell people that I work with an industry and anywhere that I have the opportunity to say, if you want to connect with the Indigenous community, go on Facebook. Start connecting with the Indigenous community there. Start paying attention to the things that are happening.
You're listening to Res to CEO. Your host, Trent Gillette. Don't forget to subscribe and listen. Welcome, everyone, to the Res to CEO podcast, where we bridge Indigenous stories, leadership, and business. Today, I'm joined by someone who's been paving that road for years, Reg Potts, strategy advisor and founder of Reg Potts and Associates. Reg, thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Trent. I'm doing well. Thank you very much. Yeah, I definitely appreciate the opportunity to sit here and be with you.
Thank you. I would like to ask, how did you first get involved in the business and leadership?
Business and leadership for me has been something for 20 plus years. In fact, I started out many years ago, learning how things are done, working directly with communities, engaging with different nations, with chiefs, with elders, with community for the most part. And I know I just actually hit the ground running, getting engaged and taking what I had known and just adding to that in my engagements with communities and people.
So for the listeners out there, could you tell them where you're calling in from? Because for right now, we're doing it virtual.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm calling from Edmonton, Alberta. I originally come from the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, which is about an hour west of here.
And earlier today, when we were on the phone, I was just looking over your briefly. You have 20 plus years of experience, and you're an advocate and obviously in leadership. You also said you work with Alex Nakota Sioux Nation plus Backwoods Energy. Could you explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so I worked with the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation for about under 4.5 years. I had spoken with Chief Tony Alexis. Him and I had some discussion. They had a 30-year vision for building a truck stop out on Highway 43. And so he asked me to come back and help them through that process and navigate it. So I spent 4.5 years out there kind of reconstructing the economic development portfolio and working on that project, which was successfully executed from start to finish.
So for what experience shaped your path into Indigenous development?
Yeah, so my experience in Indigenous development essentially was realizing that there's a lot of work to be done, and every little bit of knowledge, every little bit of experience, every little bit of everything that I was able to gain actually continued to add to what communities and Indigenous organizations were in need of and the support. So working as a strategic advisor for the number of years that I have, and working with communities and hoping of just bridging the gaps where the gaps need to be bridged, and working with communities and helping to develop proposals and strategize what their approach will be in moving communities forward.
So for people that are listening out there, like for any kind of Indigenous entrepreneur or any kind of for proposals, like how did you would say dabbled in that? Because how a lot of people are not used to documents and all of this, and for a lot of our Indigenous folks, like we're starting to learn more, especially adapting fast with technology. But what inspired you to start Reg Potts and Associate?
Yeah, so I started Reg Potts and Associates, and I started doing it part-time actually back in 2022. I was working full-time. I just shared there, you had asked about Backwoods Service. I mean, I was working, of course, with the nation. I was also working with Backwoods Energy Services. But a lot of what actually this information actually came from, I have 7 older sisters. My 7 older sisters, like myself, we are all university educated. So basically everything that they were doing, everything that they were typing, I questioned absolutely everything. I've got involved with regards to writing the proposal with them, learning through them, and then working with other individuals as well. And then I just essentially was able to get to a point where, I know exactly how to do this. I know how this is done, navigating the relationships with ISKs, the federal government, the provincial governments, navigating and executing exactly the things that are required for these proposals to go in. And I just continue to grow and do my research and do what's required.
And a lot of people would say for a lot of indigenous teachings, it sounds like you have the seven grandfather teachings. I mean, it sounds like when you have seven sisters, but I mean, for what were your some earlier challenges you faced?
Yeah, the earlier challenges, I look back from many years ago, sharing that I was born and raised here in the city of Edmonton. I was born at a time when, of course, there was definitely a lot of racism that was occurring. There was a lot of different occurrences that were happening in my time growing up, and seeing how the world has changed and how things have evolved from that period to where we are today. Those difficulties that were even when I was a young entrepreneur in my 20s, running my own company, doing the things that I was doing back then. I had a custodial business and I was navigating contracts and relationships, but it was always difficult because a lot of those times funding was out of pocket. So the access to funding at that time when I was younger, it was not rampant. There was no opportunity. It was always just a hands-on, get at it and invest in it. And today, there's a huge amount of opportunity for our young people, especially our entrepreneurs, our companies, our communities, to get ahead. There's so much support today and so much influence, from the leaders and from industry, that everyone's getting involved and finding that collaborative way to work together, which is huge. It's way different from what it was when I was much younger and navigating my way in the last 20 plus years.
Would you think that the borders between Saskatchewan and Alberta, you think Alberta is a little different than Saskatchewan, or is it the same, or what would your perspective be on that?
Yeah, I do know that, the processes are most definitely different. The regulatory processes that occur within the provinces and the federal government, between the provinces is definitely different. I know that there are certain avenues that we navigate, and we have to navigate them a little bit differently. I probably believe that for the provincial governments, that's something for them to think of. But our relationship has always been with the Crown. So with the First Nation communities, our relationship is with the Crown, technically not with the federal government. So I think with that being said, for us, it's a little easier to navigate that relationship and understanding. It's just with the provinces, the inclusivity is a little bit different in almost every province.
That's why I kind of always let people know about sovereignty. Like for me, when I did my education for me, I always let people know, like for everything that I try to dish out, it's only things that I learned and did my own education on, right? Like you said, like seek your own knowledge, and then you can find. And that's why I always let people know, like I might not know everything, but I know a lot because I always network. I always talk to people. I always ask questions. I always be open and honest, and how I was raised, because that's the only way that you can really truly get what you want out of this life, is only because when you're born, you have nothing, right? So a lot of people, they just don't act like they have nothing, but we have sovereignty. A lot of people don't know that, our grandfathers, they did something, right? And that's why I always ask people, do they even know what sovereignty means? Between, like you said, right? Is it between us as First Nations people in Canada? And people would be like, yeah, and no, Canada falls under the Crown. We have partnership with the Crown. When King Charles or whoever comes into town, from the royal family, Canada literally stops, right? And we go and see them. And I'm just saying is that that's why a lot of people just have to do their research. And especially when it comes to Indigenous politics and all of this, for us, we live it every day, right? And a lot of people don't know that. We just say even with our status, there's a lot of misconception. And for me, when I grew up, sovereignty, right? Between nation and nation, before pre-colonization, there was no one telling us on how to trade with each other. And that's why I always let people know, even for right now, as entrepreneurs, you just got to do it, because at the end of the day, what's going to happen if you don't try? And if you do succeed, at least you tried and you did something that you wanted to do. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people just don't do these things because there's they act like there's roadblocks. And so for me, I would just ask, what would you think for advice for young entrepreneurs and for people that are trying to make way, in this world, especially for a lot of things, like you said, back then you guys had to do it the old-fashioned way, and now we have technology. Technology is advancing, and I guess you can say in a lot of fields. So do you use or incorporate kind of any kind of tech or kind of anything in your business or in your life or anything like that?
Yeah, I definitely incorporate what everyone's using today. Definitely using every other avenue of technology that I can. I know that for the younger generation today, things are a little bit more different. You're born into it. You're raised. It's not something kind of new. It's just something that you've learned through that process. Some of the older generation have a little bit more difficulty navigating that. I myself try to use it, to my utmost advantage where I can and when I can. And you had asked a question with regards to the younger people. There are gonna be roadblocks, and you are going to have stumbles. But the number one thing is, our people understand everything, and it's almost like a powwow. And when you're at a powwow, you're gonna find that rhythm. And when you find that rhythm, there's going to be no barrier in place. If there's a tree there, you know enough to walk around it. And essentially, that's how we continue to move forward. Is we're going to find those avenues and those mechanisms to move forward.
And that's why, like, what would make stronger partnerships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations?
Yeah, so most definitely, I think one of the key elements on the industry side of things is most definitely that engagement, and that engagement is actually visiting communities. I share with a lot of people, if we want to work together, if we're looking to work together, collaborate, we have to become engaged with one another, and that's establishing the relationship. When we establish our relationships, we're establishing our friendships. When we're establishing our friendships, there's an avenue for collaboration. It's through that collaboration that we are actually get to the point that we're establishing partnerships, and then navigating the deals that come with it. So that's what I would have to share on that.
So, for like, how can communities prepare for industry partnerships while protecting their values?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is to actually step back and actually have a look at and one of the things that why I love visiting communities is understanding what's most important to the community. And that for me, that's one of the biggest things. And I often find that I visit communities and I don't go there for any other reason but just to understand what are the values, what is important, what's working, what hasn't worked. What are you hoping to do? What are you hoping to achieve? When I visit communities, just as another First Nation individual, I go there just to learn. I've got nothing to sell, and I'm not looking for nothing to be given.
And so, for being said, like, what's one success story that really stands out from your work?
The success story that really stands out from my work, I guess, I would say, was probably the development of the Indigenous Trailblazer Summit. That's probably the one thing. And that's the one thing that really stands out from the work that I've done, because at the end of the day, the Indigenous Trailblazer Summit, it's the people's summit. It's everything that I've learned in my 20 plus years, my engagement with chiefs, my discussions with elders, my participation in different assemblies. It's that ability to actually take everything that's being said, everything that I'm hearing, everything that's being told to me, shared with me, ceremonies I participated in. It's taking all of that, encapsulating that in that continuous engagement with community to actually build, what the community has today. Trailblazers has actually allowed that. I would probably say that's one of the most successful in my 20 plus years.
So, for our listeners out there, would you want to expand on how they would be able to attend this event?
Yeah, the Indigenous Trailblazer Summit is definitely a wide open event, so it's welcome to everybody. Everyone is welcome to attend. It's one of the things about Trailblazers is that we don't, that door is open to everybody. Our event happens in one place. Our exhibitors are in one place. Our entrepreneurs are in one place. Our tech people, everyone is in one place, in one room. And we embrace the culture. Often we go to events and do a number of different things, but this actually just brings it all in one room. Attending Trailblazers is like going to ceremony. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is there to learn. Everyone is there to grow. Everyone is there to heal. That's what makes Trailblazers a little bit different than anything that's happening in the business world today.
So, for like, one of the biggest barriers you've seen for Indigenous communities in business, I mean, what are one of the biggest barriers you've seen for Indigenous communities in business?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers that I've seen, and obviously everyone has probably seen it, and is that it's that access to capital and understanding how to access capital for the project developments, or even some of the smaller projects that they want to do within the communities, how to navigate that relationship to get to the point of where they want to be.
And like, for a lot of instance, like, so for like, when earlier you said, like, for instance, like me, right, I grew up with technology, right? And then for you, and back in, like, a lot of, I would say, you know, older generation, because, you know, for younger generation, even for myself, I'm a young generation, and for like this new generation, they call them, you know, Gen Z. And then there's even an older generation than you, and they call them elders, right? And there's like, and then there's like, you know, there, it just goes passed down. There's like, and I wouldn't, you know, for me, I think you're very young, you know, for all the things like you're doing, you know, to me, you're still a very young leader, you know, like for me, I look up to you in the aspects of like for all the things you've been doing, you know, because like I've only been on this earth for 29 plus years, and, you know, rebuilding my life from 5 years ago. But earlier, like I was saying from your question, like when we're all here together working, like, you know, nation to nation, I think that's the only way that we can find true sovereignty, you know, when it comes to like, you know, working together and educating each other. And that's why I wanted to start this podcast. So I just wanted to thank you for being here and, you know, giving your knowledge that you learned. And for me, I've always learned that, you know, learning knowledge and bringing it back to your community and then teaching your community members. That's what I was always taught for my tradition. But I'm from Buffalo River, Dene Nation. So like for us here, it's little, like I said, we're from northern Saskatchewan. So trying to voice out also people up here that have started, you know, businesses that are even like my age and are successful, like in terms of like northern business. I always call it that way because like there's like logging, everybody wants to do all these industry big businesses, but for where you're sitting at, like Edmonton, you know, economically, you think there are barriers, or you think that there could be gaps that we can bridge, especially with like, you know, digital wealth, as I call it? Because right now, like, you know, how many people we know that live on reserve but don't want to come to the city, but, you know, where there's ways that you can build like e-commerce stores and like, you know, can bridge that way with like they can sell their goods and, you know, attend your events as well, like in person, but like at the same time try to build these processes. Because even just like I said, continuing and trying to strive forward, young or old, or, you know, even just for right now, like a lot of people, like even for, you know, even for older generations, technology is an issue, right? And that's why it's a boom in like the tech business, I guess you could say. And for a lot of innovators and artistic people, like people that are they look at issues and they find it in a very better way of like how to solve it in our way, right? An indigenous way. And that's why we're succeeding, I find, in partnerships and non-organizations that are non-indigenous. And, you know, for a lot of indigenous entrepreneurs, especially for young people, like I learned growing up, like from where I come from to where I am now, like I am back where I am born, right? And that's because I'm reconnecting with my land. And I get to wake up every morning and look at the sunset, and, you know, there's a lake right here and it's very beautiful. And that's why, like, for me, for my next question, what would you see like the difference between like, you know, Alberta, because you guys are booming in ecotourism and now we're just starting, like, you know, for ecotourism. And I see a lot of potential here in the northern parts of like, you know, like I said, e-commerce, for people to start their own e-commerce store, or even just, you know, partner up and try to do that as well. And, you know, work with someone that wants to do it for the people and bring that in, right? And like I said, there's like always effects of like when our community invests in projects, and then what's the after effect, right? And those are a lot of my issues too, like especially for what I'm dealing with, like up here, like, you know, even for my own podcast, I always try to get voices out here, try to get them recorded and like monetize also their content, like especially for indigenous people. And like it's like, you know, a lot of people are not tech savvy, they're not knowing of what's going on the computer, right? They don't know where it's going because no one's teaching them. Because the only time I've ever really been impacted of, like you said, like it was impacted in my life, but it wasn't like for how like a lot of people, I had to, like I said, I didn't choose to leave my reserve. Like, you know, I grew up, you know, in the bush, you know, like, you know, in the trees, you know, playing like, you know, how our ancestors did it. And then one day, you know, Apple computer came out, and then boom, it was like colorful. And then I was like, man, that's pretty cool. And then like that just advanced my mind, I guess you can say, in terms of making me smart, like because it's framework, right? So like it's your mind, right? You can reframe your work of how like you do things in your life to be better, improving. Like, and that's why I always let people know about the medicine wheel, right? And the medicine wheel, we're taught in how to balance our lives. And that's why with this show, I'm trying to also give like, you know, the voice of the resilience. And a lot of what you're telling me is like, you know, you've been through a lot, right? And you continue to go through a lot, right? Especially with personal things going on in your life and everything else, because every else person that has, like I talk to, like personally, for all of us out there, like we go through issues, right? And we're just like, well, where do we go to find answers? And people always ask these questions, right? Especially for indigenous people. And then like, we don't have like, you guys to say the courage, because every time we ask, right, there's always like they say no, like we don't have time, or like, some people are like that sometimes in terms of big and negative spaces, right? And that's why, like you said, it's like coming into a powwow, and like, hopefully with me and everything going on, I'll be able to attend your event. And with what I'm working on over here in the northern parts, I would like to bring a few indigenous entrepreneurs, and I'm working on that as well. So as you know, a lot of people out here trying to work with partnerships and everything. So like for me, I guess you can say, from the next question, what does leadership mean to you today?
Yeah, so I'll go back to first your e-commerce. E-commerce is huge, and it is continuing to grow. You're correct. E-commerce is something that's really growing, and in fact, that's a collaborative effort when you actually look at it. Because when you look at the age gaps between individuals doing what they're doing and then what the younger generations are continuing to learn or are growing up, which is kind of a norm for them, that's that collaboration between the older and the younger. So a lot of the people that I work with and to talk to on the indigenous side of things, they're learning from their children. Their children are helping them navigate certain things and things like e-commerce. And then the important part about the collaboration in e-commerce is that when you sit down and have that discussion, and you'll have that discussion because our people are more than willing to share and talk about it. So you ask them, how did you do this? And so you spend some time and you get to figure out how someone has navigated the process, and they'll share as much information as they can. That's the beauty of it. That's that collaboration, and that's that wanting to empower people, wanting to empower each other. So when it comes to First Nation leadership is, I love working in First Nation leadership, and I believe leaders are the people that are going to be paving that path. They understand things in a different way. They come from a period of just knowing, and simply from things that have passed down from years to year for years, and then for generations. A strong leader is a person that is the person that's just will step forward and continuing to do the things that they're doing regardless of all the barriers in place. I love those leaders. I love those leaders that are just continuing to pave that path regardless of all the obstacles and everything that may come that may come as they're moving forward and doing the things that they want to be doing. A true leader is one of the things that I look at, even with regards to anything, is of course, it's that was the honesty, the integrity, and the balance. Those are the key elements. And I often find in leaders that are really making a difference, whether it's in economic development, whether it's in politics, those are the people that are actually, they embrace those three elements of their being. And when they do, that's what really makes a great leader.
So like how can they find mentors and resources like you had, for people that are listening out there? How could they find
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Mentoring leaders is, you find someone that really resonates with you. Find something that, something that you admire and someone that you admire, and just look at what they're doing, observe what they're doing, as we always have. That's how we learn. And, and then reach out, touch base, and, you'll find those people. The people of today are way more happy to share now than ever before.
So for what advice would you give the Indigenous youth starting their first business in 2025? It's almost 2026.
Yeah. To the Indigenous youth, keep trying. Don't give up on yourself. And at first, if you don't succeed, try again. You're going to find that rhythm. And when you find that rhythm, you're definitely going to have something to be one of those mentors that, that you're going to be working with the others that were there. Then you can say you've there and how you've overcome.
That's why I find a lot of young Indigenous people, as you said, they're teaching, a lot of their parents, a lot of older people, and they're already tech savvy. So that's why, for people that aren't, that's why the best way you can go ask, someone that's younger for some advice. Even that's the best way to even show that, a step forward of confidence, because a lot of people don't even cry, in front of the younger folks. Even for men, and mental health is a big issue in this category, and especially for right now, even within business, especially for being Indigenous, we always go to our people first, no matter what it is, community, especially when it comes to things, right? And that's why even in business, people don't balance things out. So a lot of people just need to take a time and meditate or something. I always try to take advice, like you said, right? When you walk in in the forest, right, people walk, they can see trees and all of this, right, and avoid these obstacles. And so for a lot of instances, common sense, for my whole life, people always just been saying that, common sense. I just observe, listen, People just be say that where I'm from in the north, right? It's like people just say, hey, you just have to have common sense. And that's why a lot of people even say like you can be book smart, but you also got to be like real life, like you have to be able to get out there and network, right? So right now, especially with what's going on, like I said, that's I think our best way, like you said, describing like going to a powwow, like, right? So like a lot of people don't even know what that it's like, experiencing with how it is to connect with your people, right? And that's why, like, for me, I always try to tell people for content and everything, like, you can just do it, right? Like, if you know how to do computers, and like you do it, like learn like YouTube and just do like, but it's like even spaces, right? Like in communities, and a lot of like right now where I'm from, like we just got a brand new youth center. You can just see the improvement and kind of like in the youth, right? So I wouldn't mind to bring tech or kind of more even for what I'm doing. But like you said, there's difficulties with economics and everything, but you just got to keep pushing forward. And with everything else, like with our young leaders today, like, that's why I always try to say balance also, like, we have to learn a lot, especially when you want to be a leader in the indigenous community. And I always say, like, to people, like, we're at war. It feels like we're still at war, right? Like, because the after effects of, like, even though that it might not seem that we're having bombs dropped or nothing, but we're still being like held back a lot of times. And that's why I let people know, like, going to powwows and like stuff like this is like a good part of like showing the fact of like how it is to heal, because we're still not in the war fact of like physical but mentally, right? Like, because that's why there's a generational trauma, and a lot of people don't know even how to identify their own issues, right? And that's why I feel like a lot of younger people fail within business, because they just don't, like you said, have those mentors or people. And that's why I started Res the CEO. So hopefully, like I said, my podcast hopefully gets out there for the younger generation and for older generation as well, because like I said, it's just supposed to be more informative, and hopefully one day it'll be in person. So like everything else, like you can dream and hope for a lot of good things. And earlier like today, like early on today, just like 1 o'clock or so, like I have a meeting, I guess you can say, with the U of A. And that would be great to talk more about, like, because it'd be interesting to get your advice on that after the call if you want or not. But because right now I don't know if I don't even really know what would be going on in that meeting, but they just want 20 minutes, and I'm just gonna listen, and that's all I'm probably gonna really do. Ask 3 questions, maybe, I don't know, but yeah. But for everything else out there, like, how can they find mentors and resources, like I said earlier? But for all of us out there listening, Reg is always on LinkedIn, and he's always answering a lot of questions. So I always let people know, download LinkedIn. It's the best way to, especially for right now, before they like get big, as you can say, because they're not as big as they should be, but they will be. Like, they're growing, and if you can get big on LinkedIn, you'll be pretty good, well, in, like you said, that space in the future. So for a lot of us out there, that's why we have to start monetizing our own people's data and all of this stuff. So like you said earlier, right, like why you're doing Trailblazer event, like that's why I always try to advocate for what you're doing as well, like, and for everything going on in this world. Like, thank you. Like, I also say thank you for being here, and I wish, like I said, like I wish I could give you something, but I'll pray for you, and I'll smudge for everything that's going on. And hopefully in the future, when I get like I said, like a podcast or a studio, I'll invite you to my humble abode here in the northern parts, because it's beautiful out here. And I would like to invite a lot of people here, and especially come to Edmonton. Edmonton's not that far, so maybe when I'm in Edmonton, we can definitely do another podcast in person, and show people like what you're all about and doing. And that's also like why I want to do more in depth, with, like you said, trying to get partnerships and everything. Still learning curve, especially with this podcast. No one, like you said, teaches these people, like our people, any types of motivational where it's like possible. That's why, like I said, when they get impacts like for communities, they don't ask like young generations, because they assume that like for me, I always assume that, like you said, they don't come together, right? They just leaders, they just go off of their own judgment. They don't, like, I find a lot of corrupt nations, as we know, because if there wasn't, there would be a lot of thriving. Like, we wouldn't be, suffering as much, because who's teaching, these leaders? Because it's like, at the end of the day, there's us younger generation, we have to like start voting, especially when it comes to things in our own like peoples, because they're like, well, why do I need to vote? And I'm like, why wouldn't you need to vote? But I'm just like, even with the voting system, to me, I just find like it's kind of like has to be updated, because last time I looked at it, looks like it was updated in like my own reserve. I'm just using as reference, like 2002 or 2001 or something for, a lot of like what's going on. So, I mean, like it would be nice to re-update that because like you say, right, like everything is adapting. So we need to adapt as well. And that's why like a successful nations are adapting with what's going on. They're not, hold back, as you say, right? Because they're healing as well. And a lot of our nations aren't doing that mentally as well. Like, so they're investing in the wrong types of things. So it'd be nice to, my nation to invest and say like, earlier, like I was talking about, and, coming to your organizations, things like that, right? Like, nation to nation, they should be reinvesting, but they don't, like I said, like my nation just went to this elders gathering, right? And then for instance, like it would be nice if like they brought a couple of people to, your event to expose, the exposure of what it could be possible. Because a lot of what you said, right? Like I looked at your website, it looks amazing. And for all of the indigenous people, you could probably, like you said, it's like a power. You probably would be able to feel, that healing and that empowerment. And you'd be like, wow, like, and then you can teach these people, like before you go to this thing, we'll build, pre-packages with business cards and everything. And that's what I'm trying to also do with helping community members, just by building simple things, right? Like designing and everything. Because like I said, not a lot of people are tech savvy. So there's a lot of wealth in a lot of places. So, revenue and making money is not always the passion, right? But if there's a process and then there's a way, you can resustain that so you can keep on doing what you love. That's why I always let people know it's not, like you said, about the profits, right? Because every community members need to thrive together. And that's what I always say, like I don't know what it was, but on YouTube, I listened to a lot of like, motivational speakers. And so for me, I was just like, he's like, a lot of people can be billionaires, but he's like, but on the internet, everybody can be a millionaire. And I was like, yeah, everybody can be a millionaire on the internet, right? So, and my perspective,
Trent, you hit on something really, really a key element there, and that's social media. Social media is huge, and everyone knows that social media is huge today, regardless of whatever platform that you're utilizing. So, in a lot of our people, you'll find them on Facebook. And I often tell people that I work with an industry and anywhere that I have the opportunity to say, if you want to connect with the indigenous community, go on Facebook. Start connecting with the indigenous community there. Start paying attention to the things that are happening. To the indigenous community, I tell them, if you want to get into business, get on LinkedIn. Get on LinkedIn, make those connections. Just start reaching out to some people. Some may accept the invitations, others may not on any social platform. But at the end of the day, that's going to be the key element. If you're indigenous, get on LinkedIn. You want to get in business, get on LinkedIn. If you're on the industry side of things, then and anyone else doing business that's on LinkedIn, start connecting on Facebook. Find out because usually the who's who that are on LinkedIn are on Facebook. The who's who are on Facebook, we've got to get them to LinkedIn. So I know those are the two elements at minimum that that I recommend for people to always get involved. Depending upon the audience and the people that you want to communicate with, those are the avenues. And one thing that I've often shared and often say that in anywhere that I go and anything that I'm sharing is that when it comes to business, I always say it's one of the reasons why I like engaging with different communities all the time. It's preparation. It's like Gretzky had said, Gretzky, the great one, had said, go where the puck's going to be, not where the puck is. So for myself, the relationship is developing communities with younger people like yourselves, people in other communities. That's developing the relationship. There's no projects, there's nothing happening, but the relationship is huge. So there may be a bigger projects that are happening somewhere else. That's where everyone else is paying attention to. And yeah, sure, I could pay some attention there too. But at the end of the day, at some point, you and your community are going to have something going, and you're going to reach out, and somebody's going to reach out. And the one thing that where we struggle on the industry side of things is building that relationship and trust. So this kind of goes back to where we were.
So for earlier, like what you said, like, what's your vision for the next 10 years of indigenous business growth?
No, I would like to see people succeed. I would like to see the barriers that seem to be existent among the indigenous community disappear. Because at the end of the day, those barriers were not created by the people. So I think collaboration between 100% nation-owned businesses, community businesses, and different First Nation communities and communities coming together, I think that's going to be huge. When we understand that there's more out there in a collaborative process beyond what currently exists, beyond the barriers, if we don't see the barriers and see the opportunity, then we will continue to succeed from a national perspective. At the end of the day, I think that is going to be one of the biggest things when we can move beyond what we believe to be just our traditional territory, because our territories and economic development has existed with our people and within our people for time immemorial. We have constantly traded, worked together, and we will continue to do so. But it's up to us as a people to realize that, these defined traditional territories have been the territories of all the people, and we've continued to share that through all of this time. So I think that's the one key that's got to hit home is, moving beyond what we believe.
So for like a lot of people, like you said earlier, like for like you had to get for knowledge, right? And you seeked it. And a lot of people, like, like you said, like you're not able to get a lot of these resources because economically and everything, right? So how could we improve these barriers, or like, a step forward of like, let's just say for what's next for Reg Potts and Associates?
Yeah. So, I'm actually working on some things right now. I realize that these are barriers. I realize that financing is a barrier, that I realize that understanding is a barrier. One of the things, I won't get into specifics, but, one of the things I often ask myself this question is communities. When you're working with communities and you're going to be working with industry, the next thing they're going to ask you is, are you shovel ready? So, most definitely that's a question that I'm asking myself, is the community shovel ready? Are the other communities shovel ready? Have they navigated the relationships? Are they developing the partnerships? Are they looking for the financing? Do they know where to go? So the next thing for Reg Potts and Associates is preparing communities in that process of being shovel ready.
Well, thank you for being here, Reg. It's this was powerful. Your story shows how leadership, cultures, and business can walk together. Thank you for sharing the wisdom. Voices like yours that inspires the next generation of Indigenous entrepreneurs. For our listeners, make sure you follow Reg Potts on LinkedIn and check out his work at regpotts.ca. I'm Trent Blatt, and this is Reg to CEO. Until next time, keep building, keep believing, and keep leading with your story. Any last words, Reg?
No, I thank you very much for having me, Trent, and thank you everybody, for listening, and I wish you all the best.
All right. Thank you, Reg.